The story begins with our lead, Cairo, living alone in her wilderness homestead somewhere in the outskirts of Tennessee. She narrates that she's a teenager who uses writing and literature to escape from the solitary lifestyle her parents have left her with for a better future abroad. She sets out for her school and takes a shortcut through the mysterious and engulfing woods, only to stumble upon one of the most bizarre experiences of her life, leading to the destruction of her reputation. She enters the literature class where Miller is her new teacher. Miller happens to be a middle-aged married man who's a published novelist. Upon chatting, Miller observes Cairo has vast knowledge in literature. Miller hands Cairo the syllabus, but she claims she's already read all of the books mentioned in the course. Winnie breaks their contact by showing up and taking Cairo away, since the class doesn't start anytime soon. Left alone, Miller commits an immoral sin by going through Cairo's stuff and finding a smut novel with vulgar vocabulary. Soon, another teacher named Boris shows up with coffee for Miller, projecting that he's good friends with him. Boris also goes through Cairo's possessions and finds out she's reading an old novel of Miller's. Miller quickly rearranges Cairo's stuff so she doesn't find out about their snooping. When Miller returns home to his wife, Beatrice, he tries to get her attention by discussing Cairo and her audacity to read adult novels at such a young age. However, this doesn't work out because Beatrice's publicist keeps calling her about some urgent work. Miller walks away to drink and play light music. Beatrice joins him and begins discussing their first dirty novel, which leads to the two getting romantic. Unfortunately, her publicist calls once again, which kills the buzz between them. The next morning, Miller and Boris are seen smoking and drinking coffee in the school's field. In front of them is the shortcut entrance, from where they see Cairo walking towards them. She stops to greet Miller, who asks her about what music she's listening to. Boris laughs out loud when Cairo mentions an old singer, but Miller gets fascinated by her vintage taste. Boris offers her some bakery goods and leaves. He walks through the locker rooms where Winnie purposefully throws her books on the ground to get his attention. Cairo notices this and approaches Winnie alone to ask what her deal is with Boris, but she casually acts flirtatious around her too. After school, the two are seen hanging at Cairo's place. While smoking, Cairo stresses that she's supposed to turn in an essay for her Yale application, but she's unable to write it since it demands knowing your greatest achievement, which Cairo has yet to discover. Winnie suggests experiencing new things that are worth writing about and then hints at writing about student-teacher affairs. Cairo asks her why she's trying to hit on Boris and her obsession with older men. After dissecting many topics, Winnie teases Cairo by telling her Miller has eyes for her. Cairo blushes and finds it hard to believe, but Winnie assures her of the way Miller looks at her. The next day, Cairo attends his class and notices how he keeps looking at her the entire lecture. By the end of class, Miller hands everyone their papers, and while giving Cairo hers, he asks her to meet him after school. While Miller stays back in class to wait for Cairo, Boris shows up and begins teasing Miller by shipping him with Cairo. Miller tries denying the allegation and keeps things low-key between Boris. Before leaving, Boris does his weird dance moves, which Miller copies in his absence. Cairo walks in on him during this, which embarrasses Miller. He asks her not to tell anyone of this, so she swears she won't. Now, Miller sits down with her to praise a paragraph from her recent writing, which has captivated his eye. As he repeats the paragraph, Cairo becomes fascinated by the fact he's memorized her words. Following this, Miller asks Cairo to write a short story using any of her favorite writer's style in order to get full marks in her midterm. Cairo agrees to this and continues confessing how she's read all of Miller's previous books. As she's praising his work and reading her favorite lines from his book, Miller invites her to a writer's club over the weekend to find inspiration for her story. Winnie barges in and breaks their connection by demanding food like a child, so Cairo takes her away. The following evening, Boris joins Miller and Beatrice for dinner at a restaurant where Winnie happens to wait tables. When Winnie leaves after taking their order, Beatrice asks Miller if she's the girl he keeps talking about. Miller corrects her and starts praising Cairo once again. She secretly doesn't enjoy Miller being fond of a little girl, so she starts attacking him personally by reminding him of his downward spiral as a novelist, and now settling for an average salaried schoolteacher. Boris acts as the mediator and cools things off. Soon arrives the day when Cairo shows up at the club. Miller sits so close to her and explains the theme of the poetry the man is reciting up front, which attracts Cairo and prompts her to share a cigarette with him after the session. The next day, Cairo brings coffees for Miller and Boris. Boris takes the cue and leaves the two alone, allowing them to get closer. A few hours later, Miller gets a text from Beatrice, asking for a weekend getaway. Hence, He goes to the class to pack up his stuff. Cairo shows up and puts her stuff on his desk before getting his approval on the author before writing her story. During this, her phone gets piled under Miller's bag. Miller disapproves of her author, disclosing that he's too provocative, but Cairo lays out facts to support her choice, during which she tries getting closer to Miller, but he doesn't make a move. When he leaves, Winnie teases her for having a crush on Miller and even bends over Miller's desk while she's at it. Boris walks in on them, so Winnie starts acting flirtatious around him. She puts his phone up her shirt and asks him to take it out, but he keeps his boundaries and refuses to do so. Seeing this, Cairo realizes her phone's missing. Meanwhile, Beatrice keeps delaying their trip due to urgent work, leaving Miller disappointed. As he's reading to pass the time, he hears a phone ringing in his bag. When Miller picks it up, he finds out it's Cairo's phone. She's calling him from her landline, asking to return her phone. When Miller drives to her mansion, rain starts pouring down. He walks in the rain to hand Cairo her phone, who's standing on the front porch, wearing a breathtaking silk gown. The two can't take their eyes off of each other. Cairo offers him to get in now that it's raining, but he refuses to do so. Cairo ends up wetting herself and reaching Miller for the phone. The two get charged, seeing each other closer, and end up sharing a very passionate kiss. When Miller returns home after this, he joins Beatrice at home. Parallel to each other, both are seen using their laptops. Miller can't help but revisit his kiss with Cairo on loop. As he gets Cairo's email containing her short story, Beatrice complains that she can't work no longer in his presence. Out of respect, Miller steps out of there and takes his laptop in the shed to read Cairo's story. It turns out to be a steaming hot affair between a teacher and his student, which arouses Miller at the time. He visualizes the entire story by placing Cairo and himself as the main characters and wonks his wily. The next day, Cairo happily takes the shortcut to reach school earlier to get remarks from Miller on her story. Contrary to his previous night experience, he scolds Cairo for writing such a vulgar and inappropriate story. Deep down, he doesn't want anyone to take a hint about their scandalous relationship, which is why he claims that he will fail her if she doesn't submit a new story. Noting the change in Miller's demeanor and his harsh criticism, Cairo insults Miller's writing and boldly claims that her story isn't being appreciated by him because she wrote something he could never. After insulting him enough, she walks out of the class. To seek revenge, she puts her story in the principal's complaint box. As she takes the shortcut home with tears in her eyes, Miller returns home to Beatrice. Cairo is joined by Winnie, whom she shares her entire story with while consuming alcohol to ease her pain. Side by side, we see Miller indulging in pleasures while Cairo cries and gets emotional support from Winnie. Beatrice joins Miller and begins making out, but their session is ruined by Boris, who shows up unannounced. Miller lets Boris catch up with Beatrice and walks out of there. Meanwhile, Cairo asks Winnie to flirt with Boris on texts to get her mind off of Miller. While conversing with Beatrice, Boris doesn't pay attention to Winnie's texts and tells her to sleep instead. Cairo takes this upon herself as a new challenge and clicks provocative pictures with Winnie to get Boris's attention. In the meantime, Cairo's story gets picked up by the vice principal. As Miller stands in front of the bathroom mirror to reflect upon his mistakes, Beatrice gets a call from work, so she goes out to talk to her. Boris also receives the vulgar photos from Winnie and decides to leave after saying his goodbyes. Simultaneously, Miller breaks the news to Beatrice about getting called into school to sign some paperwork for finding out about Cairo's story. He conceals the fact he kissed Cairo and lies about Cairo's promiscuous story, claiming that it implies he has an affair with Cairo. Beatrice becomes disgusted and begins wondering why he's being called out to school if it was only a story. She asks Miller if he actually had something with Cairo, but he lies to her face. The next day, Cairo doesn't attend his class. Worried for her, Winnie asks Miller about her after class, but he gets awkward. After school, we see a side-by-side interview of Cairo and Miller with the principal. Cairo makes sure to exaggerate her moments with Miller and damage his reputation to the max. Meanwhile, Miller keeps stuttering out of nervousness through the whole interview. The principal finds Miller guilty and fires him from school. Now his career ruined, he sits with Boris outside the school and asks how he never got caught with his flirtatious relationship with Winnie. That's when he explains that he knows how to keep boundaries and not get any further than talks. When Miller returns home with the disappointing news, Beatrice figures there's something between him and Cairo. Miller keeps weaving new lies, but when she point-blank asks him if he loves Cairo, their conversation turns into a heated argument, resulting in Beatrice asking for a divorce. On the other side, Winnie visits Cairo and tells her to take back her claims because Miller is innocent. Cairo has become stone cold after getting heartbroken, so she threatens Winnie to expose her inappropriate texts and pictures with Boris if she doesn't back off. Crying and feeling Cairo's wrath, Winnie leaves her. She finally writes her revenge from Miller as her biggest achievement in the Yale essay. She visits him for the last time, which brings tears to her eyes. Here, the film ends.
I am sure you liked the story recap. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps like that.